Go ahead and get started. My name is Reanna Putnam, and I'm the Program Manager for the Association for Advancing Participatory Sciences. We're co-hosting today's event as part of an ongoing NASA Citizen Science Leader Series, and we're joined today by Marc Kuchner, the Citizen Science Officer for the NASA's Science Mission Directorate, who'll be leading the discussion during today's event, as well as Sarah Kern, who's the NASA Citizen Science Strategist at GMRI, and AAPS Director Jennifer Shirk will be helping us behind the scenes. You're welcome to introduce yourself in the chat and use that for informal conversations. We will be recording today's event, and that recording will be made public, but we'll not be sharing the chat file. We also have opened the Q&A tool for questions for presenters, and so at the end of today, we will have a generous amount of time for conversation and discussion, and so if you have questions for our presenters, please put them there. They'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the event. This conversation about AI and citizen science has been a lively one in the NASA citizen science community. Marc and Lucy on today's call were both part of a really engaging panel on AI and citizen science back in 2023 at the NASA Citizen Science Community Workshop at the AAPS conference in Tempe. I believe that the idea for this special collection either were already brewing or further inspired by that conversation that happened there, and I'm really excited to re-engage this conversation with those two and our three other issue editors today. Next slide, Sarah or Jennifer, could you go to the journal slide? So on today's webinar, we're going to hear from the 4 issue editors of a special collection on the future of artificial intelligence and citizen science that was recently published in our journal, Citizen Science Theory and Practice. CSTP, or Citizen Science Theory and Practice, is an online open access peer-reviewed publication that focuses on the global field of citizen science and other participatory sciences. The journal accepts several types of submissions, including research papers, case studies, meeting reports, and more. The journal also works with guest editors to curate special collections on topics like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, citizen science and higher education, and today's topic, the future of artificial intelligence and citizen science. To learn more about the journal and how you can share your research, you can check out a link in the chat. We'll add that shortly. And I'm really pleased today to be joined by our issue editors, Lucy Fortson, Kevin Crowston, Laure, apologies for your last name, and Marisa Ponti, who'll be sharing their takeaways from their work on the special collection and general reflections on the future of AI and citizen and participatory sciences. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lucy to introduce the special collection and today's topic, and we'll hear introductions from all of our speakers. Thanks.
Thanks, Reanna. I hope you can hear me okay. You're good? We're good. Yeah. So thanks, everybody, for being here. This is a great topic. It's so timely and important for us to be talking about. And I hope we can collectively shed some light on this entire topic of AI, and in particular, its linkages with citizen science and how citizen science and AI can work together. So I'm a professor in the School of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Minnesota. I actually do research in high energy astrophysics, but I'm also a co-founder of the Zooniverse Citizen Science Platform. And one of the things I'm doing with that platform and groups within Zooniverse, and in particular my team at the University of Minnesota, is to understand the best way to combine our volunteers, our humans, if you will, and there's nearly 3 million volunteers that we have on the Zooniverse platform. How do we combine the strengths of the human with the strengths of the machine? And what's the best way to have them work together to enable scientific discovery? And so that in and of itself was something that I'm quite interested in, obviously was one of the reasons why I was felt so strongly about participating as a co-editor in this special collection. So Reanna's right, it's been nearly 2 years since the 4 of us co-editors agreed to work on the special collection. At least for me, I felt like AI was going to play a big role in shaping the future of the world, whether we wanted it to or not. And we needed to see what that meant for citizen science. So what were the opportunities that AI can bring to citizen science? What are the challenges that AI can bring, or well, what are the challenges that AI means for citizen science, and all sorts of considerations, like if we bring AI into citizen science, does that mean that there's less for the volunteers to do? And as we'll see, hopefully, as this discussion evolves, that is definitely not the case. But what was fun to see about the special collection is how teams are using AI, and how can we kind of cast our vision forward and see what's coming down the pike in terms of AI, and how AI can sort of be harnessed for purposes for citizen science. What was great about working with this team is the complementary strengths that we all brought to it. So Kevin and I are more on the hard science or computer science side, and Marisa and Laura on the social sciences side. So that was really great. So that allowed us to dive really deeply into the technical side of the potential for artificial intelligence and citizen science, but at the same time, keeping us centered on the role of the volunteer and really discussing in a deep and meaningful way the ethical aspects when we think about introducing AI into citizen science. So while we represented the US and Europe, we did do our best to encourage submissions from other regions, in particular the Global South. We're very cognizant of the need to do that. And I think that also spoke to one of the reasons why this issue is so timely, and that is we're seeing a rise in citizen science growing, in particular in the Global South, and sort of the need for local participatory sciences in the Global South to help everything from monitoring ecological, climate change and things like that. And then how can AI help that? And so what were the opportunities and challenges there in particular is something that we really chewed on. So to give us a little more grounding on the special collection, I think it would be good to turn to the first slide, the next slide after this one. So these are the next 4 slides are the actual figures that we used in the editorial to try to ground everybody, try to get everybody on the same page in terms of how AI is used within citizen science. And so this first figure is just sort of this data flow that shows how we can combine citizen science and machine learning, and how it's used both in data collection and data analysis aspects of citizen science. And so there's several examples of human in the loop and machine in the loop actions, and that we just note that artificial intelligence can provide general support as well to the researchers and volunteers in terms of recruitment, engagement, and sustaining the volunteer community within a citizen science ecosystem. And so then the next figure shows the interconnections between the tasks that citizen scientists can do and the tasks that the machines can do, and where we need to think about how the task structures might differ, what sorts of tools we can use to implement a human-machine interaction. And then that implies the different types of machine training strategies, which then imply the types of machine learning architectures that one would want to use. And so there's different, depending upon the research goal that a team would have, one would potentially start with the human task forward, and then think through what the supporting machine tasks might be, or flipping it around. If you just need to accelerate labeling, you might think first about the machine learning tasks, and then where the humans can be combined with the machine learning to get the best scientific outcomes. So then moving to the next, so this is just the overview of the 11 papers that eventually comprised the special collection, and just the different ways that, firstly, their goals, the different human tasks, the different machine tasks, and the sort of a synopsis of the machine learning training and architecture. And then finally, on the last slide, this is the table in which we describe the key ethical considerations that we looked at, came up with, if you will, and what happens when we think about combining artificial intelligence with citizen science projects. And we'll have more time as the discussion unfolds to get into any of the details of these figures. And so at this point, I think I'd like to turn this over to Kevin so we can start hearing from the rest of the editorial team.
Thank you. So my name is Kevin Crowston. I'm a professor of information science at the Syracuse University School of Information Studies. I have been studying citizen science in different ways for longer than I can actually remember back, but yes, but probably a decade and a half. And that initially started off with various sorts of studies of existing groups, but in the last decade or so, I've actually been active in developing, helping to contribute to a citizen science project of our own. So I'm actually a happy client of Zooniverse for our Gravity Spy project. That's one that has volunteers look at noise events from the Laser Interferometry Gravitational Wave Observatory, or LIGO, to help debug and improve it. And interestingly enough, no one told us this when we started, but inside Zooniverse, there was a prediction that it would not be a success because who wants to spend their days looking at noise events? But in fact, the project did attract its own audience, as I think most projects do. One of the innovations there was we actually did apply machine learning to do an initial classification of the images, but we used that not to automate the process, but rather to be able to steer easier images that we thought would be good for learning to people who are just getting started in the project, and then reserve the more difficult, harder to classify images for people with more experience. And that process we actually showed through an experiment was successful in getting people to contribute more, to stick around longer. The project has gotten to the point actually where the machine learning can now successfully classify many of the images, which is forcing us to rethink whether we should be in fact showing those to volunteers or reserving the volunteers time for things that the machine learning can't do. And just in the last year or so, with the rise of new tools like ChatGPT, we've started to think about ways that we can actually support interaction between the volunteers and the science team beyond the routine task of classifying images. So in particular, using those tools as part of the talk in order to facilitate a better dialogue. And so that's something that we've become very interested in and hope to pursue further. So over to Laure.
Thanks. My name is Laure Kloetzer. I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Neuchâtel in Switzerland, and I have been studying the human side of citizen science for the last 15 years. Especially in online citizen science. So I was looking at what the volunteers do, what they say, what motivates them, whether they create new things in citizen science projects or not, and especially what they learn. And as AI has deeply transformed the field in some disciplines in the last 5 years, including opportunities and challenges for learning, I was very happy to join this collective adventure of editing this special issue. Over to Marisa.
Can you hear me? Because okay, thank you. Thank you, Laure. Again, thank you for having me. My name is Marisa Ponti. I work at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden as Associate Professor in Informatics at the Faculty of Science and Technology. And I've never been involved directly in setting up a citizen science project. So my relationship to participatory science has been in the form of researcher, as a researcher. So for some time, I've studied the use of serious games in participatory projects, because this was my main interest, to understand how volunteers use this type of technologies. So, and more recently, I turned my attention to the use of AI, in particular because my question was, what is left for volunteers if AI takes over? The kind of question that you ask every time that AI starts to be used in a social activity. And also because I'm interested in AI for the social good, and I think that participatory science is a tool for social good. That's it.
Great. Well, thank you all, and really excited to dig more into some of your takeaways from the special collection. And so to start us off, I wanted to ask Lucy to come and tell us a little bit more about what she learned about how AI has been enhancing project outcomes. What can the papers in the special collection tell us about successful applications of AI in citizen science?
Thanks. Right. Well, the wonderful thing we saw was that there are just so many different ways to build AI into citizen science across so many different domains, and both in the data analysis and data collection side. So that was just fun to see. What we saw is that in many cases, the idea of deploying AI was to get through just bigger piles of data faster. But I think one of the things we focused on with the collection is that we also saw that there were more complex ways of humans working alongside AI. So just as an example, the Mantha et al. Paper was comparing what volunteers think are anomalous galaxies with what a machine thinks would be an anomalous galaxy. Both machines and humans have useful information that, when combined, actually give a better chance at finding something scientifically interesting. So anomaly detection is a big deal, if you will, in the AI community. And so using strategies for the purpose of identifying scientifically interesting anomalies is I think, something that we can collectively in citizen science profit from. And so the Mantha et al. Work explored that. And that is to get through large piles of data faster, but it is with not just a classification intent. So also one of the things I noticed was that we're kind of moving from, in particular in the online citizen science projects, this attitude of get classification labels from the volunteers, then go off and train the model to invert classes on all the other data that I have. And so then we no longer need to have the humans involved. But I think we're starting to see a shift in the research teams away from that when they realize, no, actually, wait, there is complexity in the data, and we actually need to go back to the volunteers to get more information. And so one example of that, there are several, but the Kuchner et al. Paper describes how the rarity of some animal species in camera trap projects means that it's actually very difficult to train a model to identify those more rare species. So this is something called class imbalance. Now, you could just ask, it is true that these days artificial intelligence is reasonable at what we call one-shot learning, actually being able to learn fairly quickly. Humans are very good at learning very quickly. So they don't need as much training to identify a rare animal in a camera trap image. But if you want, the best outcome is combining both. And Kuchner shows that in order to have the speed of classification that's given by the AI, but in bringing up the accuracy scores overall, in particular for these rare species, it's that combination of human and machine that is best overall for the outcomes. And then for data collection projects, one of the projects that I learned the most from was the Chanadol project, which is a great example of how projects are being deployed in the Global South. And in this particular case, it's asking for local residents to submit images of potentially disease-bearing snails. In this case, it's in sub-Saharan Africa. And what I learned from this paper is how people are getting around the technical limitations that are inherent in many cases with the digital divide and the technical divide between the Global South and the North. And so Chanadol explored firstly, the minimum data requirements that were required in terms of both quantity and quality for the local residents to train the models to be able to identify the disease-bearing snails, which snail was of this particular species or not. So that's one thing is really understanding and doing the work ahead of time so that the efforts by the local residents are optimized. But then in order to get around the high computational power that was required to train the model, they made the choice of using the capacity of the North, if you will, the technical capacity of the North, to deploy the model as a web-based application hosted and trained in Belgium. So it's really this use globally of the resources that we have at our disposal that was, I felt really so cool about that particular project. And so then just one final thing I want to note is that one of the things that I kind of knew going in, but I wanted to take away for everybody is that with Humans in the Loop, you don't actually need the latest, greatest model. It's not expensive to train some of the older models, so to speak. And just with Humans in the Loop, you can have a wider selection of things that you show them. And so you can even show things that the machine thinks it got right, but then the humans can validate that. So those are some of the major takeaways that I had.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lucy. And I linked to those papers in the chat, and I know that at least one of the authors is on. And if others are on, please introduce yourself and share the link for your own paper. It's great to have you with us. So I wanted to follow up and have Kevin go a little bit deeper into some of the skills and tools that are needed in order to enact these models and to make these projects work. And so I was hoping that he might talk about considerations to successfully add AI or machine learning component to a project and some of the papers that illustrate this in the collection.
Sure. So as the introductory slide that Lucy showed, and also for discussion just now, indicates there's a lot of different kinds of technologies. So my rule of thumb basically is if anyone says that they're talking about AI, it's because they don't know what they're talking about. There's like 19 different things that are under that umbrella. So you really do need to get into the details a little bit to be able to identify a particular AI technology that is going to be useful for the task that you have in mind. And the choice of that will then dictate how you have to train it if it's machine learning, the kind of architectures, the kind of data you're going to need. And as Lucy indicated, projects actually do have a lot of choices in this regard. You can take an off-the-shelf architecture that already exists, perhaps do a little bit of retraining to fit your own needs. These days, there's lots of online cloud-based services. So you could, in fact, not have to have the expense of owning the technology yourself, just renting, basically. And then at the other end, people with more sophisticated needs can actually custom build a machine learning architecture that specifically fits the kind of problems that they have. which of course requires people with that kind of expertise, which is not necessarily always common. In order to make these choices, though, we think that basically everybody who's in that decision loop needs to have at least a basic understanding of the AI and machine learning concepts. And so we've actually included with our editorial a supplement, which is a very, very, very quick introduction to some of the main variations and a little bit of an explanation of what they're good for and what you can do with them. So not enough to be completely informed, but at least enough to know what some of the vocabulary is and maybe some of the questions to ask. So some of the papers that stood out in that regard, many people were just doing object detection, which is something that people have been using, and there's lots of different architectures that actually do that pretty well. It's actually being used in some of the other Zooniverse projects, not necessarily ones in the paper. So for instance, Sharma et al. Actually wanted to classify photos of bees, and they did it by fine-tuning an existing model. So they didn't have to develop something from scratch. And in contrast, Gravity Spy, which is the project that I've been contributing to, we actually had partnered with machine learning people. So they developed an initial machine learning network for us, and then more recently have developed a much more sophisticated one. And actually, the project that Lucy mentioned, Chan et al., is interesting because they're using it to do object detection. So not just classifying, but actually finding in the image where the objects are. One of the things, actually, and Lucy's already mentioned this, is the data challenge. Many of these models are trained on existing data. It could be that you actually need fairly large sets of labeled data. Lucy mentioned the class imbalance problem, that the models need a certain minimum number of each thing that you want them to identify. And so if you only have a small number of photos of something, they're going to struggle with that. And furthermore, you have to have some kind of a data architecture to make sure that you're actually properly managing this data, cleaning it, labeling it. We were slightly embarrassed in Gravity Spy to discover that we had a bunch of images that had been labeled as gold standard of being of a certain class. And then a year later, when people looked at them, they're like, wait, that's not right. That's not the right label. So yeah, so that happens. So that's on the technical side, but the human side that Lucy's already been talking about is equally important. So designing the tasks, thinking through very carefully about how you think the machines are going to interact, people are going to interact with machines and vice versa. Depending on what it is you're trying to get out, you may have a very different task structure. For example, if you are trying to create a training set versus, as Lucy suggested, you already have a machine model, but you need corrections from the human. So those are going to be different kinds of things. But as she said, the human in the loop strategy is a common one that people are applying. So as I mentioned, once the technology gets sufficiently capable, I think you really do want to rethink whether it's worth having humans spend their time on things where you're very, very sure from the machine learning what the outcome is. The other point I would make, though, is that that when you're thinking about the application of the technologies, it's not just efficiency. Very often, we have that attitude of how do I get through this big pile of data faster? But the way you design the project is going to affect a bunch of other things like volunteer motivation. One of the things we've been very interested in is learning. How do you make sure that volunteers have an opportunity to learn the task? If you give all the easy ones to the machine, then maybe there's nothing for newcomers to learn from. One related fact is about retention, making sure that the volunteers still feel that the work that they're contributing to the project is valued, that it's not just, get some labels from the volunteers and then we're done with them. And of course, as you go through these, there's going to be a bunch of ethical issues, but I believe Marisa is going to be addressing those in more detail. So perhaps I will pause at this point and give back the floor.
Great. Thanks so much, Kevin. And that's a great transition to what I hope Laura will talk a little bit more about, which is this interesting element between AI and learning outcomes. And I know that Laura was co-authors on one of the papers about the impact of AI on learning outcomes in a participatory science project. And I was hoping you might talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you. Well, we know that most citizen science projects have explicit educational goals and sometimes programs. But even if they don't, learning remains central to citizen science projects. Indeed, learning is a kind of money for citizen science projects. Volunteers give their time and energy, and they get learning in exchange. I mean, opportunities to get closer to science, in particular through regular contacts with professional scientists or amateur scientists. And additionally, we know that learning contributes to the social aspects of citizen science beyond its scientific results, raising awareness to some issues and democratizing the scientific process. So it's crucial to study how learning is transformed by AI in citizen science projects. I have 3 quick points from our special issue. So as we have seen already, the main risk is that we end up with a citizen science without citizens. So far, citizens are needed to prepare high quality data to train AI, but the main risk is that citizens are not needed at all to analyze data anymore. So we could say that AI is or might speed up the transformation of participation of citizens in citizen science. Participation could go offline, of course, but it could be also a kind of upskilling situation where volunteers get finally associated to advanced analysis, the creation of research questions, and the communication of science. In our study specifically, we compare the learning outcomes and processes of novice participants who know nothing about birds to a eBird Merlin citizen science project, so in the case of ornithology. And we show that AI has an ambivalent influence. It's a kind of paradox. It makes identification easier, and therefore less people give up the task. But at the same time, the participants learn less, because they do not make the effort of trying to identify the bird themselves. So further research is needed on one side to expand our controlled experiment to different types of people with or without previous knowledge of birds, and on the other side to test learning with authentic citizen science participants and not students, like in our case. And as Kevin said, it's all a matter of design. We need further research to establish principles to design for learning with AI. Interesting uses of generative AI that we have identified so far is to support the training of volunteers and provide specific feedback on the quality of individual contributions. But finally, for me, the main aspect is that citizen science is a fantastic tool to help people learn about AI. And we have a very good example of that in the Durings paper in the special issue, where people who are associated to the co-creation of AI projects, supported projects, can learn about AI, but also contribute to defining the future of AI, and not only the future of citizen science. And this comes to the really ethical challenges that Marisa will present now.
Thank you, Laure. Am I unmuted? So I get a little bit confused. Thank you, Laure. Exactly. I'm going to say a few words exactly about this paper. In relation to, maybe Reanna, you need to ask me something? Hello?
Yeah, thanks, Marisa.
I
Yeah,
anticipated.
I think that there are some unique ethical considerations, and I think you guys outlined some of them in the intro article. I'm wondering if you can just say a little bit more about it. I know we saw that on a slide earlier, and then talk a little bit about the papers that are exploring this and how they might have been grappling with these ethical considerations in their project design.
Thank you. Lucy presented a slide with the several ethical issues that we identified from the from the papers included in the collection. For the sake of time, I'm not going to touch upon each of them, but I would like to focus on 3 of them, which are not necessarily the only important ones, of course. But one is the risk of exclusion. let me say that in the editorial, we pointed out to the fact that the projects included in the papers in the collection are concentrated in Europe, North America, and Australia. And this is no exception. Usually this is what we find in the literature. So, however, there is a growing interest to develop participatory projects also in countries in the global south. But there is a problem with data resources, because most of those countries have serious limitations when it comes to data collection resources. So I just give an example outside of our collection, but I think it's very important to mention it here, that in 2023, 40% of the indicators of sustainable development goals in the Asian Pacific region had no data available, while 10% lacked sufficient data with only one data point available. So this means that for most of these countries, implementing AI technologies, machine learning, so data-hungry technologies is very, very challenging. And the paper that I mentioned, that I want to mention to you is the collaborative power of AI and citizen science in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. I can say more in the chat about it. And this is one problem. And another problem relates to the skilling, which Kevin already talked quite a lot about it, so I don't need to repeat. But there is a paper in the collection. The title is Image Recognition as a Dialogic AI Partner Within Biodiversity Citizen Science. And the authors in this paper underscore the importance of facilitating a dialogue between humans and AI for learning tasks like species identification. For the authors, this could help address ethical concerns around the skilling. Because, and I think that this is very important, involving participants in identification tasks can be important, even though the tasks can be easily performed by AI models. I think that this is very important because participation helps develop connectedness with nature and can, create interest in socio-ecological issues, such as biodiversity. And the last point, referring to what Laure just said, there is a point about public trust in a paper called, Co-Creating AI, Designing and Enhancing Democratic AI Solutions Through Citizen Science. And in this paper, what the authors point to is that AI lacks public engagement, which is important if we want to ensure representativeness and if we want to reduce biases and support the quality of AI results. So this paper basically invites participants to voice their ideas or societal problems they wish to solve through the use of AI, and also to be involved in the development of participatory research projects. So the care here is about engaging volunteers in scientific research and supporting also more democratic decision-making regarding the use of AI. So these are the 3 points. I don't know how many more minutes I have, Reanna, because I lost a little bit track of time.
Yeah, I think if there's more on this, maybe we can dive into during the Q&A. I know that Marc has some fun questions prepared for all of you, and so I'm going to pull all of our speakers back into the spotlight. Thank you guys for sharing and for illuminating some of the papers, and thank you all to the authors and contributing authors who are on the call today. We're going to kind of talk a little bit more about the papers, but also just hear more about folks' thoughts on this really engaging topic. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Marc to lead our discussion now.
Oh boy. First of all, thank you for putting together this wonderful collection. I learned a lot from reading it. it's amazing about. Okay, so hang on. An AI bot is summarizing the meeting that we're in right now, right? So maybe I shouldn't be shocked at the wide variety of applications of AI throughout citizen science, participatory science, but I was anyway. Okay, so kudos to you all for assembling all that into a coherent picture. I want to get weird right away and ask you all, why don't we just, people are in China are enjoying these avatars which deep fake their dead relatives. Why don't we just deep fake scientists?
What, and have them do all the No, but Mark,
Yes.
one of the dreams I've had, so part of my history is I used to work at the Adler Planetarium. And one of the things that I've always wanted to do is bring citizen science into that, if you will, that virtual world, where imagine a planetarium where it's not necessarily the sky above you, but you're in the dome and you're walking around together and you've got goggles on and you are picking, you see a bumblebee flying by you and you have to classify what that bumblebee is. You see galaxies in the heavens and you have to classify what that galaxy is, but it's very kinetic, right? And immersive in that sense. So if somebody's listening and has lots of money and wants to do something like that, yes.
What about though, like a chat
I like
bot?
your idea. Yeah. I
Laura.
like your idea, Mark. The question for me is, what I like in your idea is the idea that AI could be a dialogic partner, someone we can dialogue with. But the question is, which kind of dialogic partner we need now to be able to think and to think about novel situations? Do we need to discuss with the dead scientists? Do we need to discuss with fake dead scientists? Because probably these scientists would change what they said at that time in this situation. So we would need to discuss with the true scientists who are able to change, because for me, science is also about being able to change what I think, what I say, what I know when I interact with others.
Of course, God plays dice. What do you mean?
But actually, I think it does depend on how much novelty there is. One of the things we're thinking of doing is a chat bot that has digested all of the technical documentation for LIGO, so that when volunteers have questions, the chat bot can, dig through what has already been published to answer it. So those are cases where you don't need the inspiration of a human scientist. You need the sort of patient explanatory capabilities. And related to that, we're actually wondering whether it would be a good idea to have the bot sort of constantly monitoring the volunteers' talk and then saying, oh, you're asking about this, or you have, it seems like you're uncertain about this, and then proactively offering advice. Not totally convinced that's a good idea, but it addresses one of the major challenges in a lot of citizen science projects, namely the imbalance between the number of volunteers with questions and the amount of time scientists in the projects have to answer them. That's, I think, a problem every project has grappled with. And if these tools can, take some of that burden, I think it could be quite useful.
Wow, that's a great idea, Kevin.
Oh,
Marisa.
thank you. I think that Kevin has already responded to a question that I was going to ask, which is, okay, what kind of benefit are we going to have from having deepfake scientists? And what Kevin suggested seems to be one good benefit, for example. But here, I would like to be a little bit, maybe not so bleeding edge, and say that I'm not so fond anymore of adding more and more technological features just because we can. And I think that people, especially in participatory science, still need room for real and human connections if we want to build trust and some kind of relationship among the volunteers and between the volunteers and the scientists. We shouldn't forget that one of the reasons for participating in this project is not just for the sake of helping science, but maybe we want to have fun, or maybe we want to be close to nature. That one as one of the papers that I just mentioned said. So we can keep some tedious tasks in a project that could be automatized, but we keep them because this way people can be closer to nature, and this is important. And so I think that we needed to keep some room for more genuine connections to contribute to, a sense of belonging, and also strengthen the bonds that we humans should try. We should strive to keep. Having said that, I'm not totally against the idea of deep fakes, and maybe now at this point I'm curious about what I could ask if I could have, I don't know, Einstein maybe as a deep fake. Maybe I wouldn't have any question to ask, but this is pretty much what I think.
Thank you, Marisa. I'll ask a slightly different question. So, Lucy, you've and other folks at the universe have talked about how there's sort of certain psychological hooks that citizen science projects have into us humans, right? One is that we like to gamble, and a certain rate of wins results in enhanced participation, right? Are there any other psychological hooks that you think that AI can help us hook onto, right, in our citizen science project? So one of the papers mentioned AI pre-selection of subjects as a way to produce that ideal cadence to keep people intrigued.
Right. Let's just toss this over straight to Kevin, because
Thanks, Kevin.
I was going to say something on those lines, but you bring it up. Yeah, go ahead, Kevin. Yeah.
Well, actually, it wasn't our project who did that, but
no, the zone of proximal development. That's
right. No, but actually, that's a slightly different idea. That's the idea that that one. In fact, actually, maybe that's an answer to your question. People, if part of the reason that people are coming to these projects is to learn, then this notion of a zone of proximal development, which is actually quite an old idea in pedagogy, applies, which is that if you give people things that are too easy, they don't learn from it and they get bored. If you give things that are too hard, they become frustrated and go away. And so trying to tailor things so that it's just at that point where it's an interesting challenge and something that you can keep learning from. And that is something that we think that the technology has potential to do, to be able to diagnose how hard the task is and also to try to gauge where the volunteers are. But one of the things I observed is, for example, with Snapshot Serengeti, which is a terrific project, which I don't mean to criticize, but you show up and there are 50 animals. And many of them are obvious, like perhaps elephants and giraffes, but some of them are very subtle and take quite a lot of expertise to learn to distinguish. And so just throwing someone into that, I think might be, for newcomers, a little bit overwhelming. And that's something that in our project, we tried to scaffold a little bit. Very easy things to get started, and they're very quickly moving people into things that are a little bit more challenging. So that would, I think, be an example of the AI being used as another kind of motivator, in this case for learning.
And it's funny to say that, because we're actually in the process of shifting over Snapshot Safari to more of a Gravity Spy process. So it's fun that you...
And connected to what Kevin just said, I think one thing AI can help us with is also to build confidence for the volunteers in their own possibilities to contribute to science, because we know that some people, they give up because they don't trust themselves being able to provide high quality data. So if we can provide individual feedbacks on their performance, then we can contribute to building their own confidence in their own capacity to contribute. Therefore, we can think they will contribute longer.
I haven't thought about AI in this way. So mine is a question now, a question for all of you and everybody else in the audience. Are you referring to the use of AI in this case as the same way we use the serious games to motivate people to, when we gave a score, we ranked the best or the, I don't know, to make the experience more engaging? And is this also what you have in mind? Or is something different? Then we can combine AI and serious games or some elements of games.
I think my interpretation is that while gaming is definitely a hook for many people, one of the things that we found on the Zooniverse platform is we have to be really careful with implementing a game-like structure, because while it can motivate some, it can demotivate others. And there's several papers that have come out on that from Zooniverse. So it's just, what's good for somebody is not always good for another.
Exactly.
But since we have so many wonderful citizen science projects, diversifying our portfolio is a great idea, right? We can
Yeah.
different things can speak to different people.
Right. And actually, people have built citizen science projects into games. We did it in a little research project that died very quickly, but there's some, I forget which one it is. There's some huge, massive multiplayer game where in the middle of it, you can do a protein matching, if I remember it correctly, just as, you know, a way of getting in-game cash. So I think these kind of creative connections could get exploited more and would open up the projects to a broader audience.
And from the gaming community, I also kept the idea of metagaming. So the community around the game is as important as the game. And I think this is extremely important for citizen science projects.
It's not an answer to your question, but I'm just noticing going by in the chat, people talking about Foldit. I think Foldit is really interesting because that was one that had game-like features that really motivated people. And then the protein folding problem got solved by AlphaFold. And Foldit had to pivot to a different kind of task that was challenging to humans. And so I think it's like a nice case study of, you know, AI. What happens when the AI gets good enough that, you know, you don't need volunteers doing that particular thing anymore, but they still have all of these skills that they've built up that you could deploy some, you know, figure out something else that would be beneficial.
So along those lines, there's this interesting example in the Meisner et al. Paper, which I happen to be familiar with, sort of personally familiar with, where there is an AI tool called SMDet, which is written by one of the citizen scientists. So one of the citizen scientists on the project happened to be a super developer and wrote his own AI tool, which then went on to discover, you know, make all these major discoveries and produce papers just based on that. Are there any other examples that you came across? You know, I saw some interesting discussion of this in the paper Anime, the DuoRanks paper. But do any other examples that come to mind? Citizen scientists writing their own AI tools?
One of the really avid volunteers in our project developed something where you could plot when the glitches happened in order to be able to see if there's some kind of pattern to that, or just, you know, like the real problem with the detector is that it's a little finicky. So like Tuesday afternoon for 3 hours, it'll spit out a bunch of garbage. And you don't necessarily want the volunteers spending a lot of time on it because, you know, Wednesday morning it was fixed again. And so that kind of tool I think was really interesting. But the spirit of what you're talking about, I think, is something really important, which is that many of the volunteers have a lot of skills beyond the things that we're asking them to do, and figuring out ways for them to use those skills and get involved in higher levels of the scientific enterprise is really important, but quite time consuming.
Yeah, I want to pick
One
up
of the
on
most
that.
fascinating point in citizen science for me, Marc, because It's the appropriation of a project by the volunteers. It's often very different from what the scientists had in mind. And we had an example from years ago from the Old Weather Project, where the scientists expected to get some data on the weather with the Royal Navy reports. And then the volunteers who began transcribing these reports, they got fascinated by the military history of these boats and the geography of that times. And they created lot of documents, lot of tools to be able to map the moves of these Royal Navy ships in the project. And so the project, which began as a meteorology project, included very quickly historical aspects which were not planned by the creators.
Right, and also outbreaks of disease that you could see through the logs.
Spanish flu, yeah, right. Because it was during World War I that the ships were on the. This is great that we all kind of have this as part of our background and history. This is one of the original Zooniverse projects, which is so much fun. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, this is definitely one thing that machines can't do. They can't pivot, right? They can't decide what's important to research and then pick a new topic to investigate. Oh, you're disagreeing with me, Lucy? Tell me what you think.
Well, because I'm sort of seeing where some of the future of, for example, large language models can bring us is maybe machines don't know what the right pivot is, but they can provide options, hypotheses, and work in a dialogical way with volunteers to come up with potential pivots, like you're saying. So I think I see that as being, we talked about, skilling up, moving away from some of the more simpler things, although Marisa brings some key points in contrast there. But I think really doing more, I think AI can help skill up, if you will, the volunteers and get us to deeper science and have the volunteers contribute in a more deeply engaged way to scientific discoveries.
Thank you, Lucy. No, Reanna, go away. I'm not done.
We are getting close to the top of the hour, and I know that some folks are going to have to jump off. If any of our speakers or anybody on the line can stick around a little extra, we can hopefully get a few more questions. I know Marc is eager to ask after that, but I just wonder, as we wrap up our formal event, if you guys have kind of best advice on where folks in the audience can go to learn about these topics and just resources that they might want to check out.
Our editorial?
That's true.
I'm not joking.
It's so good. I feel like I learned so much reading that.
And we really did try to make it not just sort of what each of the papers talked about. You should read all the papers too. But we did try with the editorial to contextualize the current state and what the future is going to bring.
Well, thank you all for enduring my my quiz.
Very interesting questions.
Yeah, I appreciate your questions, Marc. I know one of the things that these folks comment on in the editorial, and I'm thinking a lot about, is the future of citizen science and artificial intelligence. I feel like your questions really dive deep and took us in a fun direction there. So thank you all. And just a quick reminder that we do have a conference coming up in Portland at the end of May. If you haven't already submitted or aren't planning on joining us there, we will have a call for late breaking posters. We'll put a link in the chat and stay tuned for more information on that. We will hopefully have some fun conversations about topics like this and lots of other things. And so hope you can join us there. And with that, I'm going to turn off the recording now. And if folks are able to stay on, we can talk a little bit longer. But I know that some of you might have some other obligations. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for hosting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.